Hello, this is Rusky Business, and today, what's on my mind? Well, Warhammer the Old World is on my mind. So, what exactly is Warhammer the Old World? Now, a lot of Warhammer players like myself, and some of the old veterans may know this as a spiritual successor, possibly to Warhammer Fantasy, which ended in 2015. Now, some people will point out that Warhammer Age of Sigmar, or Warhammer AOS, is sort of the ongoing spiritual successor to Warhammer Fantasy, where it is effectively being revamped as a different game. Now, from what we have in the media in question at the moment, it does appear that Warhammer the Old World may be a return to the sort of older style of gaming that has or was with Warhammer Fantasy. Now, subtle differences to those who don't really play the game may be in the fact that in Warhammer Fantasy, they had a square base system rather than a circular base system, which meant that models tended to form troops, groups, or bands more than individual models themselves. It meant that a unit usually moved as a unit rather than as an individual model or separation of models, and it meant that skirmisher models, which would then be identified with circular base, would tend to be more unique. Now, obviously, before I go into sort of further discussion with this matter, I have to admit that I have literally no experience with Age of Sigmar. I think the Idenith Deep King are the greatest model in existence because they are literally fish people riding sharks, but otherwise, I have no experience with Age of Sigmar, therefore I'm only really taking this from a fantasy player base. So just don't take my word from it on this. We'll move on to sort of what the development team at Games Workshop are saying. It's like, you'll never believe what we're working on. The studio had to tell us twice. Warhammer, the old world. Yeah, for reals, really. Or really reals, as they like to say. Now, obviously, they don't really want to put timescale on this on the basis that this is a game that is currently in the probably pre-alpha production in terms of looking into design aspects and looking into the game itself. Now, they've obviously cited in the actual text here, it's 2 to 3 years off, definitely not soon. Keep you updated with news, etc. But fundamentally, this is a very good thing for people who originally played Warhammer, the game of fantasy battles, because it may seem like harkening back to the old sort of ways the game used to play. So, full disclaimer before I can continue, I do have some rose-tinted glasses for Warhammer, at least fantasy version of it. Now, why I think Warhammer Fantasy and why Warhammer the Old World may be a good game, at least Fantasy was a decent game, was the fact it had a multitude of issues that make it different to what Warhammer 40k is today. So if we look at one sort of element that I focus on particularly, the fact that there is a vast many factions in the game in comparison to the rather stale factions that were in now 40k. You found that there were a multitude of releases for these factions. There wasn't sort of a stagnation where you find in 40k where there's only a few factions that are primarily focused and all the other Xenos factions don't get really looked into. You've got things such as quicker units, very, very interesting, like the Night Goblin Fanatics, which basically could go and kill their own units because they just wanted to, or the model decided it wanted to. Strategic elements, one off the top of my head at the moment is the Wood Elf ability using magic to move the terrain around, which was certainly something you wouldn't tend to see. Model options basically were too many at some points. There was a lot of things you could do, a lot of models, obviously based on a unit design rather than individual model design. And you also had the elements of magic, which were certainly interesting. The complexity of the magic system was a little bit more than what you see in today's 40k. And as a result, I just feel that when you're looking into the rules aspect and the whole aspect of playing the game, that Warhammer Fantasy was a little bit more strategic and it was a little bit more enjoyable for me, despite the fact that when I was younger, I didn't necessarily get all the rules as a sort of disclaimer. But I've still found that the idea of looking and playing the game in that setting was good, and that is sort of what I hope that they retain when they come into the old world. So I have actually been neglecting the article because I just wanted to get my actual opinions across to begin with. Now I'm just going to go through it in general. Obviously it's on your screen, and I will put a link to the article down below in the sort of description section of this video. Now, obviously, it cites that in 2015, the game was destroyed by Archaon, which is a sort of individual on the sort of lore aspect. You know, it's turned into the unending war of Age of Sigmar, and from this sort of reforged primordial soup, they'll look to revamp the game. And yet, as we go through the sort of article, they said the only old world whispers from ages past with its siren song. We grow misty-eyed at the memory of long-lost heroes and a glorious kingdom laid to ruins, and of mighty champions whose saga is a song no more. So I think there is a sort of element from the Games Workshop team that they are a bit sort of misty-eyed, sort of rose-tinted glasses, and are quite sad that the game has ended to a degree. Now, they have obviously said the old world is to Warhammer Age of Sigmar as to the Horus Heresy is to Warhammer 40k. Now, if we're to look at this in a sort of general light, this may mean that the Warhammer Old World series is going to be somewhat of a Forge World exclusive. Now, to those who are not in the know, Forge World is a subdivision or sub-sister company to Games Workshop who deal and specialise in certain games, mostly around the older, more specific, more sort of specialised games like Horus Heresy, which are great in their own right, but not as mainstream. If it is to come into a factor where it is going to be along the lines of a Forge World release, we are going to see that the prices are initially a little bit steeper, and this is obviously going to factor into the player base itself. So going forward from the aspect of the old world is how much in the sort of published media from Games Workshop has there been in the past few months. So obviously we're now, as of recording, it is the 16th of June 2020. So we sort of go through the initial look and we go, oh, there has been a sort of publishing in the old world, and it's around the 11th of May 2020. Now the problem with this search is, as you can see right here, I'm looking for parts that contain the old and world on the Warhammer community section. Now this is going to pull up a lot of games, unfortunately, due to the fact that there are a lot of references to old and a lot of references to world in the 40k universe and any of the Games Workshop universes. So we go scroll down, we eventually get to another article based on the 23rd of March 2020 with the old world Ice Guard of Kislev, which is a faction I like and I may play depending on what happens with the game when it comes out. Now we scroll down further and we get to a post about cartography in the old world, which is quite cool. It's a lot of background information that I used to like reading, especially in the lore books, especially in the rule books, all that lore. Very nice to look into as well. But the issue that it is going to have at the moment in time, as it is such a developmental product, is that there is not going to be a lot of publications about this. Unfortunately, you can continue to scroll down. We are now basically in November. We get to the middle of November, and the original post itself dated 15th November 19, which was the first release and the first information provided to us about the old world has been produced. And that means that in the grand total of several months, we have had 4 publications officially from Games Workshop on their community page, which means to say that obviously with the current circumstances surrounding that they are not focusing on this as a product. Now, does this make me slightly sad? A little bit. I'm not too disappointed by the fact that they aren't publishing that much, mostly because of the fact that they are producing a lot of content for the other games as well. But it would be nice to see Games Workshop put a little bit more information out there about what's going to come in the old world, whether or not it's going to have the same factions, whether or not they're going to do a limited publication, whether or not they're going to just have limited factions. There are a lot of questions that I do have as a player and just as sort of someone reviewing this at the time, just to see what exactly they look and intend for this game. So we return to the original article, Old World, New Warhammer. What would I like to see in this? Well, if I'm looking into this sort of new game, I would want to see a return to the old sort of fantasy-esque battle system, and perhaps something akin to a Warhammer Fantasy in a new edition, to the point where maybe it's toned down and brought into the case of like where Warhammer 40k is today, where the rules are simplified and it is a lot easier to play. What I would suggest and what I'm hesitant to sort of feel at the moment is that there is not a lot of information that is being publicised by Games Workshop. Now, at this current moment in time, obviously with outstanding circumstances, this may take longer than anticipated, but I would rather Games Workshop start to bring more information in terms of the technical details rather than the sort of artwork and concept art behind what is going on, because as a sort of reviewer on this topic, I would want to see something substantial come into play to allow me to actually have a look and get into the nitty-gritty of these details and then be able to review it fully. Honestly, my expectation is that if this ends up similar to sort of Warcry or a skirmisher type game, it is something that I will not pick up, because I am looking for an old experience along the lines of Warhammer Fantasy, of a sort of mid-range skirmish to battle scenario game rather than a skirmishing game or an individual hero game like Warcry or Kill Team, for instance, as the 40k example. Now, that was just my sort of initial review over the new Warhammer information. Obviously, this has come out some time ago, and I just felt like making a video on it just to sort of capture what I believed on the topic. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Please look forward to another video. If you do have any topics that you would like me to cover, anything interesting, any interesting articles and the likes, please send them to me down below. And once again, this has been Risky Business, signing off.